Providence, Rhode Island, 2016. Morning rush hour, traffic court, cameras rolling. Judge Frank Caprio sits behind the bench as an officer pulls a yellowed piece of paper from an evidence bag. It's a 1976 driver's license application form, creased into squares, never submitted. The man standing before him is 82 years old, hands trembling, wearing a neat shirt and worn shoes. 4 decades, the prosecutor says. No license, no insurance, clean record until yesterday. The courtroom goes silent. The database shows nothing, no violations, no license, no record at all. It's as if this man never existed as a driver, yet he's been on the road for 40 years. The old man, Vincent, holds the same form in his pocket, carried every single day since June 1976. Judge Caprio leans forward and asks one question. Why? Vincent's eyes water. What he says next stops the entire courtroom cold. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in September 2016. Vincent Mariano, 82 years old, retired, factory worker, grandfather of 5, made a left turn onto Hope Street in Providence. Routine. Careful. Both hands on the wheel, signal blinking exactly 3 seconds before the turn, just like he'd done for 40 years. A Providence police officer, running speed enforcement nearby, saw the Camry drift slightly wide. Not dangerous, not reckless, just enough to justify a stop. The officer walked up, asked for license and registration. Vincent handed over the registration, insurance card from a local church charity program. But no license. I don't have one, Vincent said quietly. The officer blinked, ran the name. The database returned nothing. No active license, no suspended license, no record of Vincent Mariano ever holding a Rhode Island driver's license at all. In the system, as a driver, he was a ghost. The story goes back to June 1976. Vincent was 42 years old, working double shifts at a textile mill on the edge of Providence, raising 3 kids under the age of 10. His wife, Maria, had just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, maybe a year, with expensive treatment. Vincent sat at the kitchen table one night, surrounded by medical bills, grocery receipts, and a stack of documents he needed to file. One of them was a driver's license application. He'd been driving on an expired learner's permit for years, never getting pulled over, never causing trouble. Now it was time to make it official. The fee was $12. $12 in 1976. About $60 in today's money. He looked at the form, looked at the pill bottles on the counter, and made a choice. Medicine or license. His wife or the law. He folded the form into squares, placed it in a drawer, and told himself he'd submit it tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. Maria lived another 14 months. Vincent drove her to every appointment, radiation in Pawtucket, chemotherapy in downtown Providence, specialist consultations in Boston. He drove carefully, obsessively. 5 miles under the speed limit. Full stops at every sign. Both hands at 10 and 2. He checked his mirrors constantly, not out of vanity but out of fear. 1 ticket, 1 traffic stop, 1 computer check, and everything would collapse. The kids, the bills, the medical debt that was already drowning them, it would all come crashing down if he got caught driving without a license. So he became invisible. He took back roads when possible, avoided highways, never drove at night unless absolutely necessary. When Maria died in August 1977, Vincent kept driving the same way. The habit had hardened into survival. The form stayed in the drawer, then moved to the glove compartment of every car he owned. A reminder, a talisman, evidence of the moment he chose love over law. By 2016, Vincent's routine was locked in like a railroad schedule. 6 in the morning, drive to Stop and Shop for groceries. 9 o'clock, drive to St. Augustine's Church for daily mass. 2 in the afternoon, pick up his grandkids from school when their parents were working. Every drive was the same, careful, slow, invisible. His neighbors knew his car, waved as he passed, never questioned why he drove like someone was always watching, because someone always could be. The form stayed in the glove compartment of his 2004 Camry, yellowed and brittle, folded into the same tiny squares. He saw it every time he reached for the registration. 40 years of perfect driving, 0 accidents, 0 tickets, 0 close calls. Until that Tuesday morning in September, when a wide left turn on Hope Street brought a police cruiser's lights into his rearview mirror. Vincent pulled over, hands shaking, and knew the 40-year run was over. Judge Frank Caprio reviewed the case file the night before the hearing. He'd seen thousands of traffic violations, speeding, reckless driving, DUIs, suspended licenses. But this was different. The file showed an 82-year-old man with no prior record, no license on file, and a traffic stop that revealed a 40-year gap. Caprio, known for his viral courtroom moments and compassionate rulings, was confused. How does someone vanish from the DMV for 4 decades? The producer flagged the case immediately. Unusual circumstances, viral potential, human interest angle. The next morning, the courtroom filled early, cameras ready, prosecutors prepared with standard arguments about the rule of law. Vincent entered quietly, holding the folded yellow form in his hand. He'd brought it as evidence, proof that he'd always intended to get licensed, that this wasn't defiance, but desperation. Caprio asked the standard questions: name, address, nature of the violation. Then he paused, looked at the form on the table, and asked the only question that mattered. Why no license? 40 years. Explain. Vincent unfolded the form slowly, hands trembling. The paper crackled in the silent courtroom. He looked at Judge Caprio and spoke 6 words. I chose my wife over myself. The courtroom froze. Caprio leaned forward. Vincent explained. June 1976, $12 licensing fee, terminal cancer diagnosis, 3 kids under 10, bills piling up faster than he could count. The choice wasn't really a choice. It was survival math. Form or medicine, law or love. He chose medicine. Maria lived an extra year. After she died, Vincent was drowning in medical debt, raising 3 kids alone, working double shifts just to keep the lights on. The license felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. Driving felt like a necessity he couldn't avoid. So he kept the form, carried it as a promise to himself. Someday, when the money came, he'd make it right. But the money never came. The kids grew up, grandkids arrived. 40 years passed, and the form stayed folded in his glove compartment, a yellow ghost of the life he couldn't afford to live legally. Caprio sat back, processing what he'd just heard. This wasn't lawlessness, it was survival mathematics. Vincent hadn't chosen to break the law. He'd been forced into a gray zone where the system didn't account for impossible choices. The judge had built a reputation on understanding context, on seeing the human being behind the violation. This case embodied everything he believed about justice. The prosecutor, required by procedure to argue for penalties, hesitated. He glanced at the form on the evidence table. 40 years old, creased, carried every single day. He suggested a compromise. Pay the fee now, issue a retroactive license, move forward. Vincent shook his head. The fee isn't the point anymore, he said quietly. What mattered now wasn't avoiding punishment. It was acknowledgement. Recognition that his choice had been survival, not crime. That 40 years of perfect driving, of raising 3 kids alone, of never once causing an accident or hurting anyone, counted for something. The courtroom watched an old man defend a decision he'd made at 42 when the world had given him no good options. Caprio leaned forward again. 40 years. No accidents. How? Vincent described his routine with the precision of someone who'd lived in constant fear. 5 miles under the speed limit, always. Both hands on the wheel. Full stops at every sign, even when no one was watching. He signaled every turn 3 seconds early. He checked his mirrors obsessively. He avoided highways, stayed off roads during rush hour when possible, never drove at night unless absolutely necessary. Every single drive carried the weight of potential collapse. One ticket, one computer check, one moment of carelessness, and everything would unravel. So fear became discipline. Anxiety became perfection. The hidden cost was enormous. He never drove his kids on family vacations. Too risky, too many state lines. He turned down jobs that required highway commuting. He declined invitations to drive friends to weddings, funerals, celebrations. The form in his glove compartment was a daily reminder of the original sacrifice. The cost wasn't $12. The cost was 40 years of a contained, cautious, smaller life. The prosecutor set his pen down. He was required to argue that law is law, that exceptions create chaos, that rules exist for a reason. But even he couldn't ignore the form on the table. Physical evidence of intent, carried for 4 decades. He'd seen deliberate lawbreakers before. Vincent wasn't one of them. The prosecutor looked at Caprio and made a rare move. He recommended dismissal. The courtroom stirred. Cameras zoomed in. This wasn't standard procedure. This was a prosecutor acknowledging that the system had failed Vincent first, 40 years ago, when it forced a man to choose between his dying wife and a piece of paper. Caprio watched the moment unfold. 2 men, bound by different duties, negotiating the space between law and dignity. Vincent stood quietly, hands folded, the yellow form resting on the table between them. He wasn't asking for mercy. He was asking for recognition. And in that courtroom, on that September morning in 2016, he was about to get it. Judge Caprio picked up the form, examined it closely. The date, June 1976, was still visible despite the creases in age. The signature line was blank, exactly as Vincent had left it 40 years earlier. Caprio realized something profound. Vincent had kept this form not as an excuse but as proof. Proof of the moment that broke him. Proof of the choice that defined the rest of his life. It was a psychological weight, a moral anchor, a piece of evidence he carried every single day to remind himself that he'd once been forced to choose between love and law. And he'd chosen love. The judge saw the pattern clearly now. Countless people make impossible choices. The system doesn't account for survival math. It only measures compliance. Vincent's 40 years of perfect driving wasn't luck. It was fear transformed into discipline. It was a man building a life inside the margins of a system that had already failed him. The law had failed Vincent first. The question now was whether the law could acknowledge that failure. Caprio set the form down and spoke directly to Vincent. 40 years, 0 accidents, 3 kids raised alone. You've been the best driver I've never licensed. The courtroom erupted in applause. Caprio raised his hand for silence and continued. I'm dismissing all charges. All fees are waived. But then he added something else. Get your license. Today, I'll pay the fee myself. Vincent nodded, tears streaming down his face. He folded the form one last time, a gesture he'd performed thousands of times over 4 decades. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt like closure. The judge's lesson was clear. Law exists to serve people, not the other way around. When the system forces impossible choices, the system needs to change. The video of the hearing was uploaded within hours. By the end of the week, it had 50 million views. People across the country watched an 82-year-old man stand in a Providence courtroom and defend a choice he'd made in 1976, when survival was the only law that mattered. Vincent left the courthouse into a swarm of media. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras followed him to his Camry. He repeated the same explanation to anyone who would listen. Love doesn't wait for paperwork. The story spread fast. Rhode Island's governor issued a public statement praising Caprio's decision. The DMV apologized for systemic failures that trap people in impossible situations. Within days, insurance companies offered Vincent free policies. Community organizations stepped forward to help others caught in similar circumstances. But Vincent hesitated. 40 years of habit are hard to break. The fear didn't vanish just because a judge said it could. 3 days later, he walked into the DMV, the yellow form in his hand, and submitted it for the first time since June 1976. A clerk took his photo. A machine printed a laminated card. The database updated. Vincent Mariano, ghost driver for 40 years, officially existed. He walked out holding a small plastic card that represented something larger. Acknowledgement that his choice had been survival, not defiance. Vincent's grandkids learned the full story from the viral video. They'd never known why their grandfather drove so carefully, why he never took them on road trips, why he seemed constantly vigilant behind the wheel. Now they understood. Every cautious drive, every declined invitation, every moment of hyper-awareness had been rooted in fear. One granddaughter asked him directly, "Was it worth it?" Vincent paused, looked at her, the daughter of the daughter he'd kept alive by choosing medicine over a license, and said, "Your mother lived. You exist. Yes." But privately, he admitted the cost. 40 years of isolation. 40 years of constant vigilance. 40 years of never fully relaxing, never fully trusting that the next traffic stop wouldn't destroy everything. He finally discarded the yellow form, but the memory remained. The hidden toll of living in the margins, permanent readiness for collapse. The price of survival. A life lived smaller than it had to be. 6 months later, Vincent drives with a legal license in his wallet. Same routes, same speed, same obsessive caution. The fear doesn't vanish just because the law changes, but his glove compartment is empty now. The form is gone, leaving only a space where it lived for 40 years. Judge Caprio's ruling became precedent. Rhode Island began reviewing similar cases, searching for other ghosts trapped in the system. Vincent's story was cited in compassion law reforms, used as evidence that survival and compliance sometimes occupied different worlds. The final image is that empty glove box, a rectangular absence where yellow paper once lived. Some people break laws. Others break themselves trying to keep them. Vincent drove legally now, but he still checked his mirrors, still feared the stop, still remembered June 1976, the moment a $12 choice became a 40-year sentence.